What's up, listeners? It's Andrea. Today, we again disagree on whether this episode is good or not. Alexander is actually being awesome. And we ask the question, why does no one remember Small Wonder? Come nerd out with us.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the number one place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
Hey, I'm your co-host, Andrea. Shereese, this week we are talking Season 5, Episode 22, Imaginary Friend. This episode was written by Edith Swenson and Brannon Braga and directed by Gabrielle Beaumont. As the Enterprise explores a nebula, a little girl's imaginary friend becomes terrifyingly real. Jesus Christ. What are your initial thoughts?
I feel like this week is going to be like the opposite of last week, where you liked that episode and I didn't. I feel like this is going to be an episode that I like and you don't.
Oh my gosh, do we have two in a row?
I think so. Because we mentioned this, we talked about this off camera before, and you were like, I don't care for this one. I was like, I like this one. Yeah.
Oh God, I always skip this one. It sounds like scary Toy Story in space. This girl can see her, but nobody else can see her.
It has some serious Chucky vibes, and I will say.
Yes. I also keep confusing this episode with the one where Lwaxana keeps remembering her daughter who died, and she keeps seeing her kind of like everywhere on the ship. And I was like, is that what this is? And I'm like, Kestra, right? And I was like, we just got rid of Lwaxana like 2 weeks ago. Why is she back so soon? And then I was like, oh, this isn't that episode. Okay.
I don't know. At least this was better than that. Yeah, I don't know when that episode is.
I want to say season 7. I want to say season 7.
You know what? You're probably right.
Here's why.
All the family episodes are season 7, right?
All the family episodes are season 7 because they're like wrapping up,
suddenly
family,
everyone's got
dramas,
siblings and stuff that we never knew about.
Everybody's got a fucking aunt who's lost in space somewhere, and now they need to go shoot off to a nebula and find them. So yeah, I don't understand. I don't like this episode. I really don't. It's so creepy to me. Also,
I agree with you for those reasons, though. It is extremely creepy. I will agree with you 100%.
And Star Trek isn't creepy, although
sometimes it is.
Yeah, but not for the most part. I will say, though, the fact that there is a science explanation for who Isabel is like, oh, okay. It's like this being who's just trying to explore the ship, but, she's just a little, she's seeing everything through the eyes of a child. So it's like, it makes it, but oof.
Yeah.
Skip.
My initial thoughts is I like this one. This is the classic story of a child with an imaginary friend. But they put a totally sci-fi twist to the idea of an imaginary friend, where that friend becomes real, and it is spooky. And I thought that was really interesting. That being said, I always skip this one as well, just because it is creepy. But I like what they did here. I like the choices they made. I think it was a very interesting twist. Like, how could you make imaginary friends scary or sci-fi? And they did. They nailed it on both. So from an artistic perspective, I really like it. But from a rewatch, it's not on my rewatch list because it doesn't leave you with the feels at the end. You're just kind of like, ooh.
It really doesn't. And especially at the end where she's like, will you come back and visit me? I was like, bitch, no. Warp 9, engage. Go. Go. Drive. Get out of here.
Punch it, Chewie.
Yeah. Yes. No, after you threaten me with destruction, no, I'm good. We don't have to be friends anymore. Anyway, but that's jumping to the end. Also,
Spoiler alert.
I'm guessing everybody has watched these episodes and is familiar with them if they're listening to us blabber on about it. But yeah, I'm glad that you like that. You know how we've always said that episodes kind of come in twos. There's a kid episode and then there's a brothers episode. Apparently the theme of these last 2 weeks are Shereese and Andrea are at odds about their feelings on this episodes.
That's our doublet.
That is our doublet. All right, so we have this cute little redhead girl who's having a session with Counselor Troy, and Dad's kind of in the background, and Troy's having tea with the girl, and they reference this imaginary friend, Isabella. And Troy, Claire's like, you don't think she's real, do you? And Troy is really wonderful. This is good Counselor 101, where she says she's real for you, and that's real enough for me. And I was like, that's really sweet.
It was really sweet. And Dad bustles her off and is like, all right, Troy, give me the news. How Swift is here. My daughter? What is? And we find out that, Troy says, wait a minute, you've been traveling with her on a spaceship since she was 2. She's been moving from ship to ship to ship.
To different post. Yeah.
Yeah, so probably Clara has created Isabella as the only friend, she doesn't have to lose.
Mhm.
Suddenly, without warning, right? Like the only friend she can keep with her. So, and she says, this is normal. Kids have imaginary friends. It's totally normal. And Dad's like, are you sure? My daughter's not psycho. Okay. All right. All right. And I really, really love Ensign Sutter. I really like the dad because you can tell he is trying, like the fact that he's getting intervention and therapy. Like he is trying to be the best dad he can. He's trying to support Clara, like however he can. And he's like, I need help. So that's like mad props to him because that is hard. I mean, I'm not a parent, but if I was a parent, I could imagine it could be hard for me to be like, I need help doing this, or my child needs help. I could feel a little something about that.
Typically, and it should not be this way, but it's what it is. Typically, when there's a single parent, it's usually a mom who's a single mom instead of a single dad. You don't see as many single dads as single moms. They never reference, to my knowledge, like where Clara's mom is or what happened to mom or something. But it's just, hey, I'm dad. I'm the only parent she's got. And like, that's what it is. And it's like, okay, which honestly, Geordi does talk about like a little bit later when Sutter's like, hey, you moved around a bunch. She's like, yeah, I never knew if I was going to be, on one, remote AF outpost with my dad or like battling the board with my mom. Like you just never knew. So like mom could be on an outpost somewhere, or on a different posting. It's possible. But yeah, I do love that. But they never mentioned
it and it didn't make me like bat an eyelash.
I like, literally didn't think of it until we started until 2 seconds ago where I was like, wait, and I've seen this episode a few times and I was like, oh yeah, I never wondered where mom was, but I did like that. It's just normal. It's like, he's like, I'm doing all the things that maybe a single mom would be doing, like taking my kid to therapy and making sure they're okay. And like things that like tend to like under gender roles kind of fall in like the more feminine, which like I really hate gender roles, but I was like, yay, way to go, dad. Like you're just, this
dad is like a really good dad. And you can tell because Clara's so sweet.
Yeah.
Like she's very sweet. She still seems pretty innocent and naive. Despite all the crazy things she's probably seen on all these different outposts. They're new to this posting because they say it many times, like Clara's new on the ship and she's new, and Troy just says, you know what, let's get her around other kids. I think once she starts to make friends here on the Enterprise, Isabella's just going to magically fade away. So he's like, all right, that's okay, cool. Like, got it.
Yeah.
So next thing you know, we're on the bridge and they're talking about exploring this nebula that has formed around a neutron star. And I was like, this already sounds really cool. Sounds really cool. So as they're heading to the nebula, we see this little ball of light in space coming down towards the Enterprise and penetrating the hole. And as soon as I saw that, my first thought, Andrea, was, oh no, Troy, hide your uterus. Run, run. It's back. The beam of light is back.
That's so funny. I thought of that and I thought of the sentient glitter that left the red goo everywhere a few weeks ago. And I was like, man, how come
maybe just always have your shields up? Always.
Maybe just always do that. Or also like if there is so much as an unauthorized transport somewhere, Worf knows about it. But balls of light and glitter penetrating shields, like sensors it doesn't have to be a sentient life form.
Yeah.
Right? Can't sensors just pick up that like extra nutrient dense material has penetrated the hole? End of story.
Or something weird is going on. Why can't you just think like,
I also have oh my gosh. Why they can't just come on, security. Troy, hide your uterus indeed. Anyway, you're right. It like it's exploring sort of like the Enterprise, and we're seeing a lot of little slice of lives. And I think that's super cute. Like Beverly's giving Alyssa like some dating advice. It pops into the Arboretum where Clara said she was going to go help Keiko plant nasturtium seeds, which I was like, oh my gosh, I have nasturtiums growing all over my front yard and I didn't plant them. They're just volunteers, but they're these edible plants that are like really spicy and peppery and they're really pretty. And the flowers are edible too. Nasturtiums are really cool. But I was like, yay! Like it's like a space flower and I have space flowers in my front yard and I didn't even realize. This is awesome. And this little ball of light watches Clara talking to Isabella and the ball of light pops into her head and out again, which I thought was terrifying and creepy, but also cool because it indicated like it's not made of like any matter because she didn't feel anything. She didn't see anything or be like, right? And it kind of gets that blueprint in her mind of what Isabella should look like because Claire was telling Troy she's tall, she's blonde, she's a blue dress with white buttons, and she shows up looking exactly how Clara described her
And before the beam of light goes into Clara's forehead, there's this one scene that I actually had to rewind because I was like, wait, did that just happen? And what was the point of that? And I was like, oh, this is genius. So there's this part where the little beam of light is watching Clara and it goes up to a flower. Yes. And then it touches the flower, it backs up, and then it duplicates the flower.
Yes.
And then it like dissolves and then it goes into her head. So you're like, oh, the beam of light can copy things. And I thought that was a really, really smart thing for the producers to do, to show what the light beam is capable of.
Yeah, like a shapeshifter. Yeah.
Yeah, like a shapeshifter, like a copy machine shapeshifter. I don't think it was necessary. You could have just seen it going into her head and creating Isabella, but that extra scene right there, that extra little bit was like, oh, that's neat. It can do this with anything. It can just recreate matter. This is very cool.
That was really cool. I noticed that, but like on a double take where I was like, well, what?
Yeah,
that was
I heard
really,
the little
really
like
neat
sound, and I was like, what just happened? So I rewound and I was like, oh,
it makes a flower.
Cool. Very cool.
That is super cool. I will tell you, Clara failed to describe for Counselor Troy that Isabella is the most unhappy and serious looking kid that's ever lived. Like, this kid shows up looking
miserable,
so miserable and like serious. I was like, ugh. And she talks to Claire, and Claire's like, oh my God, you're real. Like, you appeared for me. Which, listen, she may only be like 7 or 8 or 9 years old. She's she seems like maybe 6 or 7 or 8. Like, she's pretty young. But I still feel like, Daddy, this little girl like appeared. I'm serious. Like, this is weird. Because even when you have an imaginary friend, you know they're not going to appear in real life and start talking to you. That would be freaking terrifying.
Yeah, she had no negative reactions whatsoever. She was just like, oh, hey, Isabella. Hey there.
Yeah, I was like, no.
She was curious. She was confused. She was like, how come I can see you for the first time? I've never been able to see you before. And Isabella's just like, aren't you happy? Aren't you happy to see me? And she's like, yes.
I mean,
okay,
I was.
Great. Stop asking questions. You're like, okay. You also seem a little grumpier than I recall.
Yeah.
It's like, this is like the meanest version of Isabella. But
she does say
Clara
it
has no
later
questions.
where she's like, you haven't smiled once. And she was like, smile. And it's like, you lift the corners of your mouth up and you don't look so horrible and like mean.
And sometimes you even show your teeth, but not in not in an
aggressive way. Yeah. Well, so, Isabella wants Claire to show her around the ship. And, Isabella, Claire has like some reservations, and Isabella just like bullies her into it.
Yes,
and she does this
fine.
a ton.
Let's go. It's fine. And Claire's like, but maybe I should talk to my dad. Maybe I should ask permission.
You could just tell him later.
Let's go. And then grabs her hand. And Claire's like, oh, okay. And it's like, immediately, this is not a very good friend. This is not a good friend. You're right. She bullies her throughout the whole episode. And you're like, Isabella didn't used to be such a dick. Used to be a great person.
Isabella's an asshole now. Yeah.
How did you not copy that part?
Yeah.
Like her personality.
She just got the photo. Yeah. Of the image. Now they go into main engineering, and, Clara bumps into her dad, who's in there working with Geordi and Data. And like, they're trying to come up with like a nebula rename because it's called FGC-47 Nebula. And they're like, that's not very good. Maybe we'll call it like Geordi's Space Dust or something. And I love that Data was like, hearing your choices, because Sutter was like, how about like the Sutter Nebula? And I love that Data was like, after hearing your choices, I'll stick with FGC-47.
Yep.
It's like, that's kind of cute.
I laughed out loud when I watched that.
Yeah.
That was delivered perfectly.
Yeah, it was. And Clara shows up in main engineering. She shows Isabella around, but Isabella is like invisible. So it's Toy Story in space. Like, the adults don't see her. And Sutter orders her back to her quarters.
And Sutter is so embarrassed. Like, what are you doing here? You're not allowed to be in here. I mean, I would be very upset, especially since it's almost like her being in like a hard hat zone. Like, this is a dangerous place. Stuff is always blowing up here.
There's phaser rifle tests happening.
The warp core is right there. And that thing's always about to breach. So no, I would be more like that anger that comes from fear when kids are in danger.
Get out of here, what are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah, like don't step in the middle of the street, or don't touch that hot thing. Yeah. Like that like burst of anger, like, what are you doing here? Like, you could die, you know? I would definitely feel like that anger of like, this is a very dangerous place. Sutter is just like mortified and is like, get out of here. And she's like, but Isabella wanted to come and see it. It's like, get out of here.
Man,
and you
get
just see
outta
Jordy
here.
like rolling his eyes like, I'm not going to say anything, but really I want to say, what's your kid doing here? But I'm not going to say it. It's like, well,
Yes.
your nasty rolling your eyes totally said it, Jordy. So we
Yeah.
heard message
even
received.
with a visor on, I
Even
can
with
tell
the
he was
visor on,
rolling his eyes. Yeah.
you know he's rolling his eyes.
Yeah.
So she walks out feeling really like bad. And the second she walks out and the doors close, Isabella reappears. And she's like, son of a gun, why did you disappear? I was just, I was vouching for you and you like left me. And Isabella's just like, oh, well, that's how it has to work. The adults don't think I'm real, so I have to be invisible when I'm in front of them. How unfair gaslight. Is that?
Okay, gaslight. Yeah.
So
like,
so
why
you're just
don't
going to
you
let Clara take the rap? Terrible
for your decisions? I'm not having this. So when all of this is happening, suddenly there's like this drag coefficient like pulling on the ship, and velocity has increased and then decreased. And so when they're in the hallway, the girls are in the hallway talking about it, Isabella goes, I'll be right back. And she disappears and she reappears and off they go. But in that time, like, Jordy's like, wait a minute. Like, the issue like fixed itself. This is super weird. Like, what's going on? So Isabella did something to like fix the drag on the ship, and they're walking around the ship, and Isabella wants to go someplace with a lot of people, and the girls start racing around the hallway and bump into Worf. But because they ran around the corner and bumped into him, Isabella didn't have time to disappear. So she just kind of stares at him, and Claire apologizes, and she's like, we were just playing. And he's like, go back to your quarters and we'll forget this whole thing happened.
Yeah,
right.
He's like, he's not an authorized corridor for children. You're not even supposed to be in this hallway, let alone in engineering.
Yes. Now, as they take off, but as soon as Worf exits the corridor, they retrace their steps and go back. And I was like, girls, didn't you just hear? That was my teacher voice. Didn't you just hear when the adult said, don't go there? But okay. All right. Whatever. Back in main engineering, Geordi and Sutter are collecting samples of random sections of the nebula to get measurements. And this is where Sutter like talks to Geordi about Geordi's parents being in Starfleet and not staying in one place long enough to make friends. And how like Geordi was like, I never knew if I was going to be in one place with my mom or.
So this was actually a big deal, because I think this is the first time we get background about Geordi.
Yes, it really is.
The first time we find out anything about his past we learned in, I think, season 1 that Riker grew up with his father only. His mom died when he was 1. Like, we learned all this stuff. This is our first time learning anything about Geordi's past. And we find out he's a military brat, born and raised in Starfleet his whole life. And his dad's a biologist. His mom's a command officer. So sometimes they were on ships together. Sometimes they were on ships apart. Sometimes he would be with his dad studying some really interesting aliens. Sometimes he'd be with his mom off in the neutral zone. And to him, his upbringing, as he describes, was just one big adventure, and he just loved it. So I have this question for you and everyone and anyone listening. If you had Geordi's childhood, how do you think you would have been as a child? Because as he's describing his childhood of bouncing around place to place to place, never knowing where he's going to be, and saying that for him, that was a huge adventure. I thought that was such a beautiful way to think of it. And I was like, knowing how I was as a child, that would not be my interpretation of that environment.
There's something important, though, that Geordi does say. He says, when Sutter was like, was it really difficult for you? Geordi was like, I don't remember it being that way, which really sort of speaks to like how we often have to like prioritize what's going on in our days and weeks and, kind of our daily life as adults, that like, even if something was really bad, like you don't really remember the bad parts as much. It's one of the first parts that you tend to forget. So your question is great. If I had that kind of childhood, I think I would think of it as an adventure to a certain extent. But then after a while, I'd be like craving some stability.
Yeah, he does say that as long as they know you love them, children are very resilient, which was a great sentiment.
Yeah, which was really sweet.
And honestly, the way the brain works, it's kind of the opposite. The bad memories stick way more than the good memories, which is why I think I would not like this childhood. I think not that necessarily think bad things are happening in his different adventures, but exactly what you said at the end about stability, the fact that I never know where I'm going to be, I like that. To me sounds really unnerving. And I would feel like I have no like power over my life. I have no control over where I am, or you just never know which parent you're going to be with or where you're going to go. And to me, that doesn't sound like an adventure. That sounds stressful AF. And also, I really like my childhood felt a little unstable. So I'm very much of like, I want to be in control of how I spend my time. Like I'm very like protective of that. So putting myself in Jordy's shoes, I'm just like, no. Like, I'm just like, I would not want that.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been a very adventurous person. So I think a big part of me would be like adventure. Like, as long as I'm with my mom and dad, like, I don't care where I go. It's fine. Yeah. But if you have to be with mom or dad, it's like, but I love my mom, and my dad passed away already, but I really loved him too. And I was actually really like, I was a daddy's girl when I was a kid, you know, and I wasn't a princess. He just was kind of, you know, he was like a mechanical engineer, and we'd work on cars together and do all this stuff. And like, I just really loved and treasured that. So to have to be like, okay, for 2 years, you're going to be with mom. And then 3 years after that, you're going to be with dad. It's like, wait, I don't like that choice. I don't like having to miss a parent all the time. You can't all go
together. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
maybe it'd be different if you all went together. Maybe that would be really different, because at least you have each other as that unit.
Yes. Like, imagine like Molly O'Brien, like aboard TNG, you know, Keiko is a civilian, but like, you're traveling the stars and the Enterprise is your home. I can't think of anything cooler, honestly.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
Your home is traveling everywhere. Your community is traveling everywhere with you. That same 1,000 people is traveling aboard a ship and going to all these cool places, having all these cool experiences and adventures. But you have the comfort of like home and not being displaced. Like that is seriously the best of both worlds. Anyway, Clara ends up going down to 10 Forward, and Guinan pops in to visit with us this episode.
And we find out that 10 Forward, you know, kids are not allowed to be there without adults, which I was
like, is it though? Because I feel like we've seen kids in there a couple of times.
But I think there have always been adults. And what I liked about this whole episode actually is that we learned there are rules for the children aboard the ship, which we never ever knew before. And I'm like, okay, this makes a lot of sense, because Andrea and I are always complaining about why are there kids on the ship in the first place, because it's a very dangerous ship. But to know that there are rules so that the kids aren't just roaming anywhere, anytime, like Wesley in season 1, just doing whatever, wherever. It's like, no, you're not supposed to be in engineering. You could die. No, you can't do this. You can't do that. You have to be in this area. But if you're going to be in 10 Forward, you have to be with an adult. I'm like, oh, there are, okay. So I really appreciated that. And I love that at the beginning of the scene, Guinan and Data are looking at the nebula and they're trying to find shapes in the clouds.
That's so cute.
It's so cute. And Guinan's like, look, it's this, look, it's that. And Data's like, what are you talking about? And then Data says, you know, psychologically, humans or whatever, humanoids want to anthropomorphize things and make shapes that aren't really there. And he does this whole psychological dress down of why people find shapes in clouds. And then he ends with, besides, it's clearly a bunny rabbit. And I just thought that was so cute. Like,
I loved that as well, where like she's it's a this, and then maybe it's a that, you know, they're looking at shapes and clouds. And I love that they have this debate. And of course, Data has a very Data thing to say where he's like, perhaps it is like the person seeking comfort and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, by the way, it's a bunny rabbit. And I love that, by the way. He didn't call it like a Tarkasian bunny rabbit.
Right.
It's just a bunny rabbit. I was like, oh my God, it is so
just
cute.
A regular Terran bunny rabbit.
Yeah.
So Guinan starts hanging out with Clara because she's Guinan, and she's like, you can be my guest and let me get a bubbly drink for you. And Clara's like, it's me and Isabella. And so Guinan's like, oh, I'll get 2 drinks. And Clara's like, no, Isabella doesn't want one. So this whole time that she's pretending to hear from Isabella, I actually wonder if this light beam Isabella is responding to her, you know, or if it's her made up Isabella. We don't really know. But she's like, no, Isabella doesn't want one. I'll just have one, whatever.
Yes, like the invisible Isabella. It's like, is she actually talking to Clara, or is Clara, because Clara did this before Isabella showed up, where she would like lean forward and kind of listen to the air and then like have a response. Yeah.
So I was like, I wonder. But in any case, they have a great talk, and Guinan totally doesn't judge her, which shocks the heck out of Clara. She's like, wait, you really believe Isabella's real? No one else believes it. You must be some strange kind of adult. And Guinan reveals that she had an invisible friend as a child as well. Hers was a Tarkasian razor beast.
I love that.
Yeah. And
I want to make my dog Penny be a Tarkasian razor beast for Halloween. That'd be amazing.
It's probably going to look like a Targ.
Yeah, it probably will. It probably will. Except that she said the Tarkasian razor beast had wings. And I was like, oh, yeah, she's kind of like Penny's a black Labradoodle. So I'm like, oh, she'd be like a black like dragon or something. It'd be so cool.
Or a gargoyle or some kind of cool like creature that flies. So we also find out a little bit later on that Guinan still talks to her imaginary friend to this day because it brings her comfort.
I think that's really sweet.
It's really, really sweet. So Troy comes to fetch Clara. Who knows how she found out where Clara was, but she did. And she came to get her. And she also knows that Clara was in engineering. So maybe Dad, maybe Ensign Sutter was like, Troy, I need your backup because we're trying to figure out how to get out of this nebula without dying. So can you just check on her? So Troy does. And Troy really, again, Troy is so clutch. Like, she's great. She's really, really great in this episode.
Yeah. Well, she takes Claire away from 10 Forward and she's like, you're new aboard the Enterprise, but just to let you know, 10 Forward is a place for adults only. And Clara insists that Isabella made her go. And Troy kindly says, would you like me to talk to Isabella? Which I was like, yes, Troy. Right there. Like, this girl insists that this imaginary friend is real. So just play along. Even if you don't believe it's real, like, just play along. That's what needs to happen. So,
and she teaches Clara how to set boundaries.
Yes,
which is
she
like
does.
Snap to Troy. This is what you
Total
say
snap
to
Troy.
Isabella.
Yes. And she spoke to Isabella. She kind of bent over and she talked to the air. And I thought it was kind of cute because they were in the turbo lift and she starts talking to Isabella and Clara goes, she's over there. Like, you're talking in the wrong direction. And Troy was like starting to get annoyed, I could feel. And she was like, okay, Isabella, it's not okay to get Clara into trouble. Before you do anything, going into restricted areas, you have to ask an adult. And Clara leans into the air. And this is where this is Nebula Clara. This is bad Clara. This isn't like the sweet, innocent Clara that didn't actually exist.
This is Nebula Isabella.
Sorry, Isabella, not Clara. Clara leans into the air and says, Isabella says you better leave us alone. And I was like, dang, okay, now we're starting to get into bad Toy Story.
Yeah.
And so Troy is now concerned and Clara's doing inappropriate things and blaming them on Isabella. And I was like, this is where Troy's like, it's maybe time to get her involved with some real friends. Like, there's a ceramics class happening tomorrow. I love that Troy, by the way, just knows the school schedule off the top of her head, where she's like, there's a ceramics symposium in the children's playroom tomorrow at 3.
Well, she's always getting her steps in by going around the ship and seeing what's going on.
She really is being like, what's going on in here? Yeah.
She saw a flyer or something.
She saw the flyer. She saw a flyer in the hall panel for sure. So in her quarters, Isabella bullies and manipulates Clara into doing off-limits stuff. And when Clara says no, or she's like, I'm going to get in trouble, Isabella pulls the, like, I thought you were my friend, bit. And you're like, oh, God damn it. Yeah, like, every child has suffered this. So it doesn't matter what day or age or month or year or decade or planet, I thought you were my best friend is a manipulation tactic that all kids have had to deal with at least once.
Yep.
At least once.
Yep.
And I was like, oof. So Troy comes to take Claire to the ceramics class, and Claire's like, can Isabella come? Because, Isabella's invisible again.
And always Troy goes, comes with everything, yeah.
Yes. And Troy goes, no, let's bring her like another day. And Claire looks back and she goes, okay. And Isabella's left in the quarters. She kind of comes, she like reappears and her eyes turn red. And it reminds me of that show, Small Wonder. Did you ever watch Small Wonder?
I did not.
Oh my gosh. It was like a IBM software programmer in the late 80s, like made a little robot daughter. And like her eyes would glow red if she like heated things up. Like she could hold a cup in her hand and her hand would turn red and the cup would like steam. So it's like, I warmed this up. So it was like a combination of like Data, but her eyes would also turn colors, I think. So it just reminded me of Small Wonder.
Small Wonder was evil because when you see these eyes glow in Isabella, you're like, something is about to go down and it is not going to be good.
I'm pretty sure Small Wonder did have an episode where like her name was Vicky, which was like an acronym for like some kind of something, right? Like, is programmer talk for like some sort of humanoid, whatever. But like, I think there was like an evil Vicky or something. For like an episode, like her wires got crossed. So it basically was this. And those shows ran like at the same time. I'm just saying, if anybody remembers the theme song to Small Wonder, which is going to start playing now, then take yourself a trip down like memory lane for a hot second. We've got evil Small Wonder with Isabella. I need to get you to watch the show. It is so freaking cute. It really is.
I have to say, you're not selling me. With the clips and memories, but okay.
she's like a little girl Data. Like, you would love her. She doesn't fit in, but she kind of understands why, but she also doesn't totally understand why. She knows she's a robot. Like, but like when the kids go to like a play date at like somebody's like backyard pool party, she can't jump in because then she would short circuit. Like, it's really sad, but she's very sweet. She can also kind of like stretch and stuff. So like she would water the plants and like her legs would stretch like, whoop, and she'd water the plants and pie and they'd be like, whoop. You're just shaking your head at me. I'm serious. It was a really cute show. Why doesn't anybody believe me?
This is why I need Picard. I need someone who will believe me.
Somebody watch Small Wonder. Damn it, it was a good show. I mean, but of course I was like 9 when I watched it, so I saw myself in this little girl. I was like, I can be a robot too, or whatever.
Right,
yeah,
that makes sense.
Anyway, Isabella has had it with Clara's shenanigans of holding healthy boundaries for herself.
That's basically what it is. Clara has a boundary. Isabella doesn't care for the boundary. So Clara leaves the situation. So Isabella burns the house down. It's like she tantrums like immediately after you see these red glowing eyes. I think it cuts to commercial break, but when it comes back, the ship gets hit by this invisible space net again and starts getting pulled back by this drag. And then you're like, oh, I know it's something to do with Isabella and she's not happy. So maybe she's going to like crush the ship with the space net. At this point, we still don't know what's going on with space and the ship and stuff, but we know Isabella's involved in it. And we kind of take a peek over to see what's going on with this ceramics class.
Isn't it good to see Alexander not being an asshole? Like, he's just being like a sweet kid.
That is literally the only thing I put in my notes about this whole thing is like, wow, this is so refreshing. Alexander's just a regular old normal kid.
That's what I wrote.
Outrageous. He's just a normal kid doing normal kid stuff.
He is becoming well-adjusted aboard the Enterprise, and look at him. Not only is this an excellent use of Alexander as a character, where it's like, now we've got a girl who's new. She's kind of lost. She's got this imaginary friend. She needs to make real friends. Who do we know? It's not Wesley. It's Alexander. And it's like, finally, this is the only time I've ever been happy to see Alexander where I'm like, oh, this fits. This totally works. Yeah.
So,
and he's making a ceramics like cup for his dad,
he's
like
making
a warrior's
this cool
cup.
goblet.
Yes, which is spikes.
Yeah, it was very cool. I would drink out of that goblet. It was very cool.
It was also gigantic. And I will tell you, I started taking ceramics classes over the spring because I love learning new things and doing stuff with my hands. And I did learn, I made some really beautiful plates and I love to cook. So I was like, oh, awesome. But I forgot when they dry and then you fire it in the kiln and then you like glaze it and fire it again, it shrinks like 3 times. So it loses like 10 to 12% of like its size.
So now they're like teacups.
So my dinner plate is like a salad platter, maybe like an appetizer plate. It can hold like 3 miniature quiches, and that's about it. Like I made a water bowl for one of our mutual friends' cat, and it shrunk so much it just looks like an ashtray.
It's a water shot. Like if they want a shot of water.
You know what? She actually, because this friend of ours is very like, she loves the luxe life. She was like, oh, this will be my cat's like treat bowl, like her snacky bowl only. She'll just get little kibble snacks.
The right amount of snacks in it.
Just in that bowl. She'll get fed in another bowl, but this is her snack bowl. And I'm like, wow, only your cat would have like different bowls for different courses, but sounds good. My ashtray got used. So yes, when I saw that goblet, I was like, God damn, that's huge. Like, it's huge, but I was like, during the shrinking process, though, it will actually be...
It's going to end up being a teacup.
It'll still be it'll be like a big goblet, because he made it, like, human... Like, you would have to use, like, 2 full adult hands to, like, lift this thing, like, to drink from it. And I was like, oh, by the time it shrinks, it will be, like a Klingon-sized goblet. It'll work. So way to go, Alexander, for understanding the shrink ratio of your clay. Snaps to Alexander. Further snaps.
Yes.
Man, I'm off the deep end today.
This is going to be a great episode. So Clara gets some clay and she starts making a thing too. And Alexander's like, she's like, how do I do it? And Alexander's like, oh, like this, and put your thumb here. And it's just a very sweet scene. So Claire's having a good time. She's making good friends.
She's doing so good.
Ella is so effing jealous. And I actually don't blame her. It would have hurt my feelings too. Like how she was just like, can she come? No, she can't. And she's just standing back there like, hello. Like, it hurt my feelings a little bit.
She's doing this Ferengi thing from last week. Excuse me.
She totally is.
Yeah.
So as soon as Alexander gets up to go get some more water for them or whatever, Isabella tosses the tray of clay down and breaks Alexander's mug.
Like smashes his goblet.
And he's all like, why would you do that, Claire? That was so mean. That really hurts my feelings. And I was like, look at him expressing himself using full sentences. And I was like, okay, come on, Troy. Like, you're clearly doing your job with this kid. Wasana did not take the whole train off the track.
When I saw that, I was like, wow. look at this
How far
kid
he's
using
come,
his
right?
words, being like, that was really mean. I'm really angry with you. Like, you will never evolve past having emotions. Like, nobody's supposed to, like, when people say, like, you need to have control of your emotions or you're acting, like, over emotionally, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have emotions. You can have all the emotions you want, but you can't be, like, an asshole to people. And look at him being like, that was super mean. Like, I'm really mad at you. And I was like, this is the most healthy thing Alexander has ever done so far. And I'm like, so thrilled. But you know what? Poor Claire's like, it wasn't me, I promise. Now she's starting to get freaked out.
Alexander's like, what do you mean it wasn't you? And he's like, no, it was Isabella. And he's like, you're the only person here. There's no such thing as invisible people. Just own up to it, Claire, that you did it. And Claire's like, but it wasn't. And then Isabella takes a handful of clay and chucks it at Alexander. It hits him in the back of the head. He turns around. He's like, uh-oh, wait a minute. Like, I just got hit by an invisible
but
person.
There's nobody in the corner. Yeah,
exactly.
There were a bunch of people in the class, but they were in front of. They were like
they were on the other side of the class. There was nobody over there. So now Alexander's like, and because he's a kid, of course he's going to believe it was Isabella. But Clara does not stick around to find out.
No,
she's
she
just
doesn't.
like, she just takes off running. Like, Isabella ruined everything. She's really mad. She just ruined Alexander's thing, and now Alexander's yelling at her, and she just can't deal. So she just takes off. And you're like, I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
Absolutely. And oh my God, poor Clara like runs to the like arboretum and is crying. And Isabella shows up and she's like, you left me alone. I had to do everything by myself. And I was like, wow, codependent much?
Really? And what all did you do anyways? What were you doing?
You just
what were you doing
that
you needed Clara for? Nothing.
Yeah, like nothing, girl. You can walk through walls and shit and fly around. Like, what do you fucking need a 7-year-old kid for? Yeah. Like, come on. But she's like, I liked you, but now I don't care. And when the others come, you can die along with everyone else. And her eyes go all small, wonder red again. And I was like, oh my
terrifying.
God.
Clara's already freaking out, and now she's getting death threats. And you're just like, whoa, this took a very serious turn. Very quickly.
Like baby's first death threat. I was like, Jesus Christ, like this is freaking terrifying. Terrifying. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, the like adults are starting to figure out that there are these like plasma strands in the nebula. And when they end up like emitting this radiation out of the Enterprise, like it's actually visually really cool. You see these like millions and millions of like individual strands of plasma energy kind of light up, so they're like in sort of like a spider web almost,
or like a fungal network of roots.
Yes,
very cool looking. Very
or like
cool.
I also thought like if you took like a microscope and looked like deep into like a cotton ball, like the strands are just sort of everywhere, where I was like, oh, totally cool.
And it turns out that the strands can just shift density randomly. I mean, we find out that it's Isabella effing with it and whatever the creatures are that live there. But at the time, they just know like sometimes it's clear and sometimes it's not. And it's interacting with our warp core energy in some kind of weird way, where sometimes it just pulls us back and it's sucking out the energy. And then sometimes it lets us go forward. So at this point, they have 12 minutes left to exit the nebula because they've already decided this is getting a little too dangerous. So let's just scan it from the outside. And they've got 12 minutes and you're like, oh my gosh, I hope they make it. That's what I was thinking.
Well, actually, something else even happens before this. Picard is trying to maneuver the Enterprise out of the nebula, but different strands are like dragging it and it's losing speed and energy. And they're like, we may not have enough energy to exit the nebula, so we could get trapped here. Now, Ensign Sutter calls Troy to come and talk to a super freaked out Clara because she got this death threat and she's scared that Isabella's going to hurt her. And she says they're going to come and kill everyone. And Troy is like, okay, which I feel like at this point, we've seen enough weird shit aboard our trip around with the Enterprise. Maybe I feel like at the very least, Riker should be aware of this too, and he can kind of pass it up to Picard if something ends up happening.
Or Beverly,
further.
I think.
Or
I think
something.
Like, let's scan her brain, like maybe and sentient beings in her brain, or a parasite, or a psychological breakdown. But she went from happy-go-lucky Isabella to like she's trying to kill me, like.
Yes.
Investigate.
Yeah. So Troy offers to go into Clara's room to make sure Isabella isn't there. And it's strange for me to see that Clara's room has doors that close, because usually like the bedrooms are just like a little alcove kind of off the main room.
Yeah.
And I was like, even the closets have doors?
Yeah.
But Shereese, she goes to check in the closet and Isabella appears for Troy, and Troy turns around and is like, and scares the shit out of her and then sends an energy beam and knocks her out. And I was like, oh my God, like things are getting.
It's every kid's worst nightmare that when a grown-up comes to the rescue to check under your bed and check in your closet, they're supposed to find there's no monsters there so that you can sleep. It's a child's worst nightmare for the adult to be checking and then get attacked by the very monster you were convinced was there the whole time. So Clara just starts screaming her head off.
Which wouldn't you?
So. Yeah, she's just like, you know, and Troy's laying there unconscious and you're like, what the F? So the next scene, we're in sick bay and Troy's just like describing this little girl who like knocked her out and stuff. And next thing you know, Picard is here and Ensign Sutter is like, Clara has this invisible friend, started making death threats, said it was going to kill everybody. And Picard's like, doop, doop. Worf, security alert. There's something on, like he believes all of it.
I love it because it's not the only bit of information he gets. The story is corroborated by Troy, and then he comes to Worf, who also corroborates that, you know, a girl with a blue dress and white buttons and blonde hair was with Clara, and they were like running down the hallway. So he has seen this girl, and that's what Picard is like. Okay, so we have an intruder alert. Set scanners to whatever maximum, whatever. And at this point, now we know that these light beams are coming. So a bunch of new balls of light, like what Isabella showed up as originally, appear and go to work on the shields. And Geordi's like, we have about 8 minutes or so before these puppies drain all our shields. So this is where they're like, Clara, do your thing. We're going to throw you in the Arboretum in your pajamas and you talk with this child. You know, so they bring her to the Arboretum to talk, and Clara's like, I miss you as a friend. Come talk to me. And Isabella won't appear. So Picard does this whole thing. It's like, we know you've been on the ship. We just want to talk to you. Or do you only communicate by threatening like a small child? And that's where Isabella shows up. And the veil is dropped.
Shows up right after that because he says that and she doesn't show up. And then Clara says, Isabella, I'm really scared. And then Isabella shows up. So it's like, okay, so she wasn't going to be bullied or manipulated, but she did still come to the rescue for Clara, even though she said she was going to kill Clara. Like there was still a little bit of like loyalty or something, a little bit of care and concern for Clara's well-being.
Yeah.
So that was a thing.
You're right.
But then they talk and you're like, Isabella sounds a little crazy.
Well, yeah, they are a species that they didn't give a name, but basically, they were looking for richer energy sources, and the Enterprise's like warp trail is a richer energy source than anything they've ever seen. So they were like, you know, she's like, they sent me to investigate to see if we can like use you for energy, but we also are going to destroy you because humans are unfeeling and horrible and you're mean to kids and you don't care. So you deserve to be like destroyed. And Picard's like, okay. You're seeing this ship and you're seeing us as a species for the first time through a child's point of view. Like adults do seem like they can do anything they want whenever, but kids don't get any freedom. But like we value our children so much that we set rules and boundaries to protect them because they often don't know like the risk that they take with certain activities. So we set these boundaries so that they don't get hurt because they are that important to us. And so she like disappears and all the kind of light bulbs sort of take off. You know, Clara, before she does that, Clara does say like, please, like we can be friends again. I just don't want to, you know, be destroyed or whatever. So that's when Isabella finally takes off. And Picard's like, okay, we're going to be out of here in an hour, but within that hour, I want you to send an energy beam into the nebula to like feed these like energy beings.
Yeah, because it turns out it's only going to take about 20 minutes to fix the warp core. And at this point, they're at the very edge of the nebula. So, I mean, like a good kick and they're back out into normal space.
Yeah.
But he says, okay, if the warp core is going to be fixed in 20 minutes, I actually want to leave in an hour. So they're going to spend 40 minutes just pumping energy back into the nebula. So he's kind of keeping his word, even though he never promised he would do that, which I thought was really, really sweet because they could have just like flown off into space and been like, F that, let's put some buoys around here.
Yeah.
Do not come near this nebula.
Yep.
Yeah, like they will try to kill you. They are crazy. But instead, he like keeps his promise, like his word, even though it wasn't a promise, and sends a ton of energy, which is really cool. So they're kind of like chilling, waiting for that to be done so they can exit the nebula. And we find ourselves back in Clara's room, and Isabella pops up again, sitting on her bed, which again, terrifying, absolutely terrifying. But Isabella's just like, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry about everything that happened. I'm sorry that I scared you. Sorry that I threatened to kill you. Sorry that I was actually going to kill you. Can we be
it's
friends?
It's not just a threat. I was actually going to do it.
Yeah, we were like in the midst
of
we were like 8 minutes away from total destruction.
Mm-hmm.
But like, so sorry about that. You know, and Claire's just like, that's okay. It's fine. We're still friends and you can still be my best friend. And Isabella's like, I've never had a friend before. That was really cool, right? That was great, right? Isabella apologizes for pretending to be Clara's Isabella. She says, right. I'm sorry that I was never really your Isabella, so I'm also sorry that I tricked you. And Clara was like, well, you sort of were for a little bit. You were kind of like her. And it was like, yeah, you kind of sort of like, you looked like her, but like really from the second you showed up, you kind of weren't anything like her, but okay. And that's when Claire's like, I'm really sorry I have to go away, which I just imagine Claire's had to say many, 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 many times in her small childhood to all of her friends in every place she stayed. And Isabella's just like, do you think you'll come back to visit me? And Claire's like, I don't know. And that's kind of where it ends. And I agree with you. It's like, no, I'm not coming. No one is coming back here. We're going to put security buoys everywhere. But I probably wouldn't tell Isabella that at this moment. Let's wait till we're out of the nebula. Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
This goes back to like last week where that Creosian ambassador is like, thank you for this information of this crime you're going to commit. Let me go tell the authorities. But like he says it before he leaves so they have a chance to kill him. And you're like, dude, what? Yeah, no. Clara's like, of course, I'm gonna email you every day. Warp 9, go, right? Like they're out of there, right? If Clara returns, I would say
if Clara returns like to this nebula.
If Clara returns to the nebula, maybe just have like a bunch of energy source ready to just shoot out there so you could like feed them and they don't come in, you know.
Yeah, honestly, Clara, don't come back to this nebula.
You know what this is? This is a toxic relationship where you are like, okay, I guess we could have made them friends one day. And then once you're actually out of the nebula, like metaphorically, like you're clear of that relationship, you're like, what the F was I thinking? No, I'm never going back there. Not ever. Mm-hmm. No.
Yeah.
Isabella, you're on your own, boo. See ya. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Like we're
threatened to kill me multiple times. Nope. And then actually tried to. So we're good. Like, no, we're good.
Nope. Once I'm out of this nebula, I'm never looking back. Peace out, yo.
The nebula for Clara, much like this episode for me, is a skipper. It's like, don't come back. Don't go back.
So I'm guessing that's your final thought.
It's a skipper for me. I don't like it. I don't hate it. I just don't particularly like it.
Yeah.
It's just one I like don't really go back to.
It's unlike not one you want to watch ones over that and over.
Yeah, it's like the Luoxana ones I like avoid like the plague, but this one I'm like, yeah, there's other ones that are better. Like next week's Borg. Oh my god, it's so freaking good. Mm-hmm. What are your final thoughts?
I kind of like the insight into military life for families potentially. Like I thought that was interesting. This episode definitely does have Chucky vibes, and I completely agree with you. I don't think it's the worst episode ever at all. Like I don't think it's season 1. I don't think it's a bad episode, but it also doesn't feel good. Like you don't feel good watching it, and you don't feel good at the end. So there's like no reason to watch it again. You don't want to just be like, ooh, let's do this one. It's kind of like, oh, they escaped barely. That's good.
You're right.
Let's move on to the next episode.
You're right. Yeah. It's like, this was a weird escape with like a very toxic, manipulative, scary little girl. Like, we don't need to any of this.
But I think it was very, very, very well done and a super interesting story.
Yeah. Well, guys, next week we are breaking down season 5, episode 23, Borg. And I can't wait to watch it and break it down with you guys. And thank you so much for nerding out with us.
Bye.
Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.